Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. As you begin the fiscal year 2026 appropriations process, I encourage you to block the USDA from enforcing its recent regulation mandating electronic identification, or EID, ear tags on cattle and bison moving interstate. Ending this unlawful mandate and destructive policy is one of my constituents' top priorities, along with thousands of ranchers and cattlemen across America, especially those independent and family-owned operations that make up the heart of the American West and our nation's food supply. On November 5th, 2024, the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service's final rule, use of electronic identification ear tags as official identification in cattle and bison, went into effect. The rule amends the 2013 Animal Disease Traceability Rule to mandate EID ear tags for cattle and bison that move across state lines. Not only does USDA lack the authority to enforce such a mandate, but it ignored the devastating repercussions of this flawed policy and failed to follow the proper regulatory process. Such repercussions include the destruction of thousands of small businesses and accelerated vertical integration of our food supply. For states like Wyoming that lack major meat processing facilities, most livestock will be moved across state lines at some point during the life cycle to access the market. This subjects my constituents to this rule while arbitrarily excluding their competitors in those states with packing operations. In its 2013 ADT rule, the USDA estimated that the cost of a nationwide RFID system would be between $1.2 and $1.9 billion. Yet USDA estimates that the current rule would cost just $26.1 million annually. This sleight of hand was achieved by considering only the cost of the ear tags themselves, ignoring all related compliance costs, including for wands, software, hardware, retrofitting of infrastructure, and labor to implement a functioning EID system. They also included only 11% of the regulated community, thereby nullifying their claim that this rule is about disease traceability, with USDA itself admitting that it must have 70% compliance for it to work for that purpose. I appreciate that over the last 2 years, this subcommittee has sought to shield U.S. ranchers from the cost burden of this rule by providing $15 million to the agency for implementation. Unfortunately, those efforts have not protected the rancher by no fault of this subcommittee. The underlying policy itself is flawed, and there is simply no means to match the end to its purported achievements. In November, as the regulated community was preparing for the rule to take effect, state veterinarians were already reporting a shortage of EID tags. This shortage continues to plague the system, forcing ranchers to buy more expensive tags or be non-compliant with the rule. Throughout the rulemaking process, including in response to comments received about the proposed rule, USDA assured the regulated community that the ear tag manufacturers were prepared to meet this mandate. Yet the shortage persists, with states as recently as last week running out of tags and having to create backorder lists for producers who are now in violation. Government mandates never result in decreasing the cost or increasing the supply of the mandated product, and the EID situation is no exception. Tag prices have skyrocketed, meaning the faulty $26.1 million cost estimate is even more absurd as compared to the true cost. If all this weren't bad enough, I reiterate that the USDA does not possess the authority for such a rule. The EID final rule cites the Animal Health Protection Act. Congress, however, did not empower USDA to use the AHPA to impose such a mandate. The law also includes no provision allowing the USDA to impose criminal or civil penalties regarding violations of AHPA regulations, meaning it does not have the authority to implement the rule other than through the most extreme form of enforcement possible, which is denying access to the interstate cattle and bison markets, thereby essentially forcing bankruptcy for noncompliance. For this very reason and others, the rule is under an active legal challenge. These policy shortcomings are a result of a regulatory development malpractice. After determining the rule to be significant for regulatory flexibility purposes and that a majority of the regulated community would be small businesses, the USDA dismissed the rule's impact on small businesses based on outdated data and failed to conduct the legally required RFA analysis. It failed entirely to conduct a federalism analysis, even though states have their own laws regarding animal traceability, and rigged the cost analysis, as I discussed earlier. These legal and good governance violations are endemic to the rule, a rule, mind you, that is a solution in search of a problem. The U.S. produces the healthiest and highest quality livestock and meat in the world. At its core, this rule was advocated for and drafted by Big Ag, the packers, and the ear tag manufacturing companies, those corporate interests with the most to gain from this government mandate and who wanted federal subsidies to implement a system that the independent and small producers do not want and cannot afford. The result? Massive harm to the American cattleman, further perpetuating distrust of Washington, D.C. and the USDA. In the face of the rule's continued operational failure, now is the time to act, and I urge your subcommittee to address this issue in the fiscal year 26 appropriations bill. Thank you, and I would wait any questions.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman, for the testimony. So let me ask a couple of things. One is the when you said it includes 11% of the regulated communities, that's because, is that all that travels interstate, or why? Where does that?
In part, yes, it is, because in states like Kansas, Texas, Ohio, Iowa, and Nebraska, they have packers. In states like Wyoming, we do not have any big packers.
Right. So this is all for protection against disease, but in essence, and I know from training as a physician, if you want to protect against disease, you have to protect the entire community. And what you're saying is they're only targeting 11%. And it's in states where, and some of the states like yours, where there are no packers, where you have to go interstate.
That's exactly right. It's incrementalism at its best. They knew that the cost of this would be so astronomical. As I said, over a decade ago, they estimated the cost to be between, at that time, $1.2 to $1.9 billion. They knew that that would absolutely shock the conscience of everybody involved in the industry. So what they've done is they've tried to slice it and dice it so that they can minimize what the cost is. So even by their own numbers, if they covered 100% of the market, it's a $250 million regulation, because they say for 11%, it's $26.1 million. That doesn't even cover the cost right now, and we already have a shortage of the ear tags. And so by their own numbers, it's $250 million bill or regulation. And now they're going to start trying to ramp it up and try to cover more so that they actually get the disease traceability mechanism in place.
Right. And now, pardon my ignorance on this, but don't most cattle have an ear tag already?
They already have ear tags. We have back tags. We have tattoos. We have brands. Our disease traceability system.
That's what I thought. So you could trace it. It's just that it will involve something other than electronic
That's exactly
immediate
right.
trace, right?
Right. But we already have an incredibly effective disease traceability system in place, and we have for well over 100 years.
And finally, from what I read, beef production is kind of at a low. Beef prices, and I do the grocery shopping,
Yes.
are pretty darn high.
Yes.
And what it sounds like is that this rule would actually decrease beef production further, because some cattlemen would go out of business, and increase prices even more.
Vertical integration is what they're after. And as I've indicated, when I've been involved in this rulemaking actually for over 6 years now, so I'm intimately familiar with how this came to be. The main drivers are your ear tag manufacturing companies, as you can expect, the packers and the big guys. And Michigan has already adopted an EID mandate, and they are substantially ahead of the rest of the country in terms of reducing their small, what they refer to as their small producers. They define a small producer as 500 cattle or less, and they have their cattle industry has just really cratered since they adopted an EID mandate, because they're vertically integrating because of the additional costs associated with the EID requirements.
And finally, is the current administration actually enforcing this at this point?
Well, you can't, they're red tagging cattle. So it's almost automatic, because when you're trying to sell your cattle across, or your bison across state line, they're red tagging cattle. So yes, and then there's the shortage of the ear tags. One of the other wrinkles in this, because it does cover bison, tribes are some of our biggest producers of bison in the United States. Our tribes, especially out west, this is one of their economic drivers. They don't view bison as livestock, they view them as wildlife. And so this actually applies to bison as well. I would challenge some of the folks here in Washington, D.C. who adopted this rule to go out on the ranches in Wyoming and try to tag some of the ears on those bison. You don't handle them the way that you do cattle.
Right.
Yet this rule applies to our bison industry as well. So our tribal members have also opposed this regulation because of what it does to them, what it does to their mandate in terms of running their operations. operations.
And I know that's true because we had a bison producer in my district, and they had to bring their cattle to Pennsylvania to be slaughtered because we didn't have a local
That's right.
processing. So they would be, and finally, how can we solve this problem in the short term? Because if we put this in an appropriations bill, let's be honest, we're probably not going to get action until the fall. But it sounds like it's an immediate problem right now. So what can be done immediately?
So I have introduced bills to nullify the rule as well, as standalone bills. But we also want to stop them from having the financing available to implement this regulation. So I am continuing to push back against this, and I'm also working with the administration to see if we can get some relief from this regulation, because it is astronomically expensive, and also just handling the cattle, having to run them through the chute. You can tell from reading this that the people who put this together do not handle livestock. They don't know how we brand. They don't know how we, when we put our cattle through the chute. We don't handle our cattle very often. They're out in the pasture. This is not something where you're running cattle through your chute every day so that you have the ability to do this. Once you brand your cattle when they're young, you don't generally handle them again until you're going to ship them for the next stage. So I grew up on a cow-calf operation, and you'll do your work in the spring after they calve, and then you don't handle them again until you ship them in the fall when they go out on pasture or go into a feedlot. So even that, they're adding steps to the entire process of livestock and meat production.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your passion on that. Ranking Member Bishop, do you have a question?
No, I appreciate your passion for this. But you agree that the motive behind the regulation was the health, safety, and welfare of the consuming public to be able to track cattle in the event of diseases.
Well, I'm not sure that I can agree with that.
I'm sorry?
I'm not sure that I can agree with that. And the reason that I say that is because I know what has happened in other countries that adopted an EID mandate. An example is in Denmark, they adopted an EID mandate, and a year ago they imposed a $100 a head tax on all cattle, not because of a disease outbreak, but because of global warming.
Because what?
Because of global warming, climate change. And then the same thing happened in Ireland. In Ireland, a couple of years ago, they adopted an EID mandate. And as of August of 2023, they issued an order. They didn't follow through with it, but they issued an order that they had to slaughter 41,000 head of cattle in Ireland, not because of a disease outbreak, but again, because of climate change. So I have real concerns that, there was such an outcry over that they didn't do.
What does the ID have to do with climate change?
Methane production is what they claim.
Okay.
Methane production. And so there's that issue,
But
and then,
the ID would help them to number the cattle?
yes.
And
So in order to issue an order like that, you have to know where the cattle are and you have to know your percentages. So let's say Harriet Hageman runs 500 head of cattle. They need to know that, and they need to know where they are so that they can say, you have to reduce your herd by 10%, and they have to know how many I have, and this is the way that they do that. So we already have a very robust disease traceability system in place. In fact, you're talking sometimes 24 hours. In addition to which, our cattle producers and bison producers pay very close attention to their herds because it's their livelihood. So what I'm concerned about is this is a mechanism that can be used for nefarious purposes. Other issues associated with it are the fact that we don't know how the data is going to be protected. All of this information is potentially subject to FOIA because USDA cannot exempt itself from the Freedom of Information Act.
is there any reason why it should be protected?
Yes, because there are people who want to put ranchers out of business. And again, for the climate change ideas, and to try to prevent, especially out west. So where I come, 48% of our surface estate is owned by the federal government. We have a lot of grazing on BLM and Forest Service lands. There are people who would love to remove all cattle off of our BLM and Forest Service lands. They say, it used to be cattle-free by 93.
So they want to control what we eat, huh? They want
Yes,
to make
they
sure we
do.
don't eat beef.
Yeah, so there are some aspirational reasons for the rule, I get that, and disease traceability could be one. But again, this is a problem, or this is a solution in search of a problem because we've already solved the traceability issue largely. This is concentrating the market, vertical integration, and I think it will have a very negative impact on our independent cattle producers.
I share your concern about the vertical integration,
Yeah.
but I really am concerned that we have full traceability because of the possible outbreak of disease. And somehow we need to be able to balance those two.
We do. One of the things I would like to see is less imports from countries that we know have problems. And I think that if we start addressing it from that standpoint, we could actually be more effective at preventing the importation of some of the diseases that we eradicated in the United States many, many years ago. So I think that we need to be looking at our entire food supply chain in that regard, but the imports can also be a problem.
Absolutely, and of course, we've got to have the personnel there to be able to conduct that screening when they come in.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Appreciate you appearing before the subcommittee.